name's Madeline Ogilvie. I'm a lawyer by trade. I've travelled and worked all over the world, but I was most recently Labor member for Denison in the Tasmanian State Parliament, and that's a bit of a family tradition. So we've been here, our family's been here on one side of the family for about 6 generations, a long time. And we have made a big contribution, I think, to lots of things, but one of the important things is access to Mount Wellington. Well, Mount Wellington is very much in the hearts of people who live in Hobart. It's very wild and free and a very exciting place to go and visit. And people in Tasmania feel very passionately about their conservation areas and their parks. Mount Wellington in particular, of course, wasn't really accessible for everybody, for the people, until the road was built up the mountain in the 1930s. So my grandfather and my great-uncle were both Labor members of Parliament back in the 1930s. My great-uncle was the Premier and my grandfather was the Attorney General back then. And they did a series of big projects because it was the era of the Great Depression, and they wanted to get people working and to build things up in Tasmania. So they started things like the tourism industry, the paper-making industry. They built all of the state schools, and one of the projects that they were very keen on was to build the road up the mountain. And that was because it employed a lot of people, and employing people and giving those men the work, real work, to build a road that could then be used by everybody for free access to the mountain for all time was really dear to their hearts. So that's how that project started. The road up the mountain, we all call it the road up the mountain, but it's called Pinnacle Road, that's its official title, but it used to be called Ogilvie's Scar, which is a pejorative term, or a term, of a less favourable term. And the reason they called it that was when it was being built, of course they had to cut some trees down to build that road. It was a very difficult road to build. Hundreds of men worked on that road. And when it was first carved into the mountain, it was very visible, zigzag pattern. But now, of course, over time, those trees have grown up, and so it's very hard to see it, except at night, when you see the twinkling lights of the cars as people go up to the top to see the beautiful, sparkling views of Hobart at night time.
Mount Wellington lies directly behind Hobart and is the city's dominant feature. It is 1,270 metres high and was formed during the Permian, Triassic and Jurassic ages. The organ pipes are the predominant feature, named for both appearance and sounds produced by the wind. The Van Diemen's Land Aborigines were the first to see the mountain, calling it either Uyangahi or Oriontere. The first white man to record its existence was Lieutenant William Blythe in 1788. During early exploration, the mountain underwent many name changes, including Table Hill, Montagne de Plateau, Skiddaw, Mount Collins and Table Mountain, after its similarity to Table Mountain, Cape of Good Hope. Between 1822 and 1824, it was renamed Mount Wellington after the Duke of Wellington. George Bass was the first white man to climb the mountain in 1798.
I think in the early 1900s, about 1903 it was proclaimed a park. So fortunately there's no development is not allowed to be taken up there. The only thing I would say, there's always controversy about putting up a restaurant on top of pinnacle, quite apart from the cable car. Now, that may have merit as well. That's never happened because I think there's been a lot of protests about it.
How's it formed? How is Mount Wellington formed? What a great question. So I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is that it was actually a volcano originally. And so when you see the organ pipes and the, I think it's dolerite, hopefully I'm correct, the rock formation that comes up the middle, that was actually part of the core of a volcano. And I also believe, hopefully I'm correct in this as well, that chain of volcanoes was part of the same chain that formed New Zealand. So that it actually becomes one under the sea. You can see it's one plate where the two plates meet. So I think that's very interesting to know that, because that would have happened millions and millions and millions of years ago. But it gives us its character.
Black Tuesday, 1967. Many factors led to the disaster. Among them were extreme weather conditions of high temperatures and strong wind gusts, a good spring growth of grace, the steep slopes of the mountain, and the accumulation of forest fuel also contributed to the extensive and rapid transformation of the scenery. Bushfires. One of the most memorable and devastating bushfires of all was that of 7th February 1967. The following page from the Mercury, 9th of February 1967, graphically describes the events of that Black Tuesday. The fire left charred and bare tree trunks across the face of the mountain. In places, the intensity of the fire was so great that all that remained were massive dead tree trunks from previous fires. The 1967 fire reduced the Springs Hotel to a pile of rubble and twisted iron. A few remains of the hotel are still visible a short walk up the hill behind the picnic area. A description of the day's events outlined in the report on 1967 bushfire presented by the Solicitor General. 3 p.m. The communication system throughout Hobart was disrupted. 3:30 p.m. The direction of the wind has changed to the west and the fire from Sleeping Beauty was moving rapidly along the mountain and had reached the Springs Hotel, which was burnt to the ground. The people sheltering near Fern Tree Hotel were evacuated to Hobart via the Huon Highway, through dense smoke and with scrub and timber still burning on both sides of the road. By the 1870s, timber milling had denuded the slopes of Mount Wellington. Residents voiced their concerns about the destruction to the vegetation and removal of man ferns for the decoration of Hobart's shops and streets. One such outburst was recorded in the Mercury in 1876.
We have a lot of tourists who come to visit, and there's certainly pressure on the road and buses and cars that want to go up there. And the road is closed when there's heavy snow. People get very anxious about that. But you know what, I think that's part of the charm, that it's not always accessible, that actually you have to pick your times. The mountain has moods and seasons, and sometimes it's snowing so much that you can't go to the top. So I think it's a lovely thing that tourists want to come and see it, but I think we always have to remember that the local use and the people of Tasmania treat the mountain with a great deal of care and love as our mountain. So when it comes to the temperature of Mount Wellington and how cold it can be, I think it can get down below zero, obviously. And when the winds from Antarctica come up, we can feel that chill. You get the sleet and the snow. And even as we talk today, I know that the snow has come down to a very low level, I think down to 200 metres. Because I live in South Hobart, of course, we see the snow settling on the grass. And at times there have been really icy blasts where it's gone down well below zero, perhaps even to -10, and snow has settled even as far as in Newtown, and the kids get a snow day and they get a day off school. So it's a lovely time, but it's freezing cold.
The huts are the work of young fellows who spend their spare time in the bush, and they spare no pains in making their temporary dwellings pleasing to the eye and comfortable to inhabit. A study of Mount Wellington's flora after the 1967 bushfire noted that the fire did not produce significant long-term changes in the distribution of plant communities or their species composition. While some plants were slower to recover, the study recognised how vulnerable and also how adaptable native plants are to fire. The story of Mount Wellington will continue into the future, but as for now, Mount Wellington is one of Hobart's and Tasmania's greatest attractions.